said, please come and look at what we've got. We've got this guy. The chain of command came to the nest and told them that they did not have green light to shoot the guy and they were not going to arrest him. Why? Quote, leadership did not have the engagement authority. Do not engage. We had identified the bomber. Our intel guys did their work. The Biden administration would not authorize the shooting nor the arrest of the bomber that killed these 13 Americans and 170 of our Afghan allies, and wounded and maimed many, many others. Why? I asked the Inspector Generals, do you have an answer? Can you provide that answer in writing to our committee over the course of the next several days? Sir?
So, thank you for the question. As I testified in my opening statement, following the withdrawal, we pivoted our work at DoD OIG to deal with some emergent issues.
In the interest of time, my time has expired. Do you have data regarding?
Well, what I was going to say is we've not done oversight work on that now, but as I testified, we did obtain a copy of the administration's after action, and we're actively reviewing that now. And if there's additional oversight work to do, we'll do it.
Inspector Generals, if you do have data, my time has expired. If you do have data regarding the bombing attack and the murder of American citizens at the gate in Afghanistan, we ask you to please provide your observations in writing to this committee. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Stansberry for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to welcome and thank all of our witnesses for being here today. Obviously, our Inspector Generals play a vital role in ensuring the oversight of our federal agencies, and I want to thank all of you as well as your staff for the important work that you do. I also want to take this opportunity to thank all of our active duty military and veterans who served bravely in Afghanistan and continued to serve our country. And, you know, I want to just acknowledge the comments of the previous speaker here. There's no question that the withdrawal from Afghanistan was chaotic, it was terrifying, it was violent, it was difficult, and the loss of those 13 service members can never be replaced. They paid the ultimate sacrifice for their service on behalf of our country. And we should be honoring their memory here today in this committee hearing. But I want to also acknowledge that the American mission in evacuating both our service members, American citizens, as well as our allies in Afghanistan was not in vain. In fact, in those final days, we were able to evacuate 124,000 U.S. citizens and other nationals who were allies to the United States. And I want to say, as a New Mexican, I represent New Mexico's 1st Congressional District. We personally saw the brave service of our service members in helping with the evacuation efforts. In New Mexico, Holloman Air Force Base was one of the 6 designated sites where evacuees were sent when they came to the United States. And I personally had the opportunity to go down and visit not only with the evacuees as they were arriving on our shores, but also the hundreds, literally hundreds of service members, mostly reservists, air women and airmen, National Guards, who volunteered to go help with the evacuation mission because they understood after 20 years of being involved in this conflict that the Afghan allies who were being evacuated had stood bravely with our American troops on the ground, and that our mission and responsibility as we were pulling out of Afghanistan was to ensure that those allies were able to get out and their families were able to get to safety. So I do want to acknowledge that those efforts were not in vain, and to acknowledge the lives that were lost. But I also think it's really important that we set the record straight on really the path that got us into this mess and those final chaotic days. And so, Mr. Storch, I know you've been asked many of these questions already, but I just really want to be clear about the path that got us to the final days of the evacuation. So first of all, is it not true that President Trump entered into negotiations directly with the Taliban in February of 2020? And isn't it true? Thank you. And isn't it true that over the course of those negotiations and the agreements that the Trump administration had with the Taliban directly, they were negotiating directly with the Taliban, it included an agreement for a rapid drawdown of the troops who were stationed in that region?
Yes, and I should say all of this is based on our lead IG reporting. We've reported on this.
Right. And so it was the Trump administration who set the wheels into motion to actually rapidly draw down the troops, and did so in direct negotiation with the Taliban. And yet, even though those agreements were put into place in 2020, there were a series of agreements on the side of the Taliban regarding their behavior with respect to the international community, those who remained in country, and the United States, which ultimately the Trump administration did not hold the Taliban accountable for. Is that correct?
We've reported out on the back and forth on all this. Yes, ma'am.
Exactly. So it was President Trump who failed to actually ensure that the Taliban upheld their portion of the agreement before agreeing to rapidly remove American troops, putting our troops at risk in those final days. And Ms. Angarella, these actions ultimately left our Afghan communities vulnerable and also led to the collapse of the humanitarian assistance infrastructure that was in country at the time. Is that not correct?
It certainly increased the challenges for delivering the humanitarian assistance, yes.
So I just want to be clear, you know, in the final days of the American pullout from the war in Afghanistan, it's clear, and Mr. Sopko, you stated this yourself, that the Trump administration, quote, sold out the Afghan government. Mr. Sopko, did you state those words?
I think that's quoted from somebody else. I don't think I said that, but I think it's in our report.
So it's in your report. So it's really crucial that we're clear about what happened in those final days, and that it was the previous administration who set things into motion. And finally, I know I'm out of time here, but I do want to acknowledge once again our brave service members who have not only continued to serve and help those evacuees and Americans who are continuing to work on these issues, but as well as our aid workers and international community. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Biggs from Arizona for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you, our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Chairman, I request unanimous consent to submit the following into the record. November 7th, 2022 letter from you and Rep. Grothman to Inspector General Sopka. October 25th, 2022 letter from you and Rep. Grothman to Inspector General Sopka. June 22nd, 22 letter from the Office of the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction to Congressional Committee chairs. And a February 1st, 2022 email exchange between individuals in the offices of CIGAR and the Department of State.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. And each of these documents discuss and provide evidence of the Biden administration's actions to evade cooperation with CIGAR, which has been working on 5 separate reports requested by Congress. These reports discuss the underlying causes that led to the rapid collapse of Afghanistan, Afghan National Defense and Security Forces, potential loss or compromise of U.S. reconstruction assistance resulting from the Taliban's return to power, the ramifications of the U.S. military and diplomatic withdrawal for national security and for the people of Afghanistan. Mr. Sopka, in particular, I thank you for your testimony. Last June, you informed this committee that the Biden administration was refusing to respond to requests for information. And you've given an update today. And quite frankly, I've not seen any public letters from the previous Democrat chair of this committee requesting that the administration comply and cooperate with you. You've indicated pretty conclusively that you've got a broad scope of information you need. You're not getting it. Sitting next to you are the inspector generals for those 3 agencies or departments. I hope that they will encourage that and look into that as well. But I want to specifically now direct the rest of my attention, Mr. Sopko, to you. There's been a number of public reports alleging that former President Ghani took money out when he fled. I know that you've tried to find it in your own report this time. I want to get to that. There's new documents that you've received alleging additional funds transferred at that time. Could be, they indicate that tens of millions of dollars in cash and gold bullion spirited out of the country through Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and other neighboring countries. Can you elaborate on what you know so far and what more information you need from this administration to conduct that investigation?
Thank you very much for asking about that. That's a recent investigation that we've opened up. We have sources who have given us that information. I can't really discuss it in much detail, but it covers about the 6 months to a year before the actual collapse. This information indicates tens of millions of dollars, if we can confirm it, that's the thing, right, in gold bullion and in currency that left the country through those three stands, Uzbekistan, I think Tajikistan, and maybe Kyrgyzstan. I can't really tell you much more. We're digging into that information. It came to our attention recently. I will report back once we can. We don't know if we're going to be able to make the case. Some of this information is old. We're actually in the process of translating a lot of this information right now, and but I can't really tell you much more. It seems credible to some of my investigators who have been working for me for 20 years and they're retired law enforcement agents, but we still don't know what we have.
Are you getting cooperation from U.S. agencies and departments in that investigation?
Yes, but they're law enforcement agencies. It's not the policy people at State and Aid and DOD.
Okay, all right. Let's talk about something else. And this is really, we were led to believe that the Afghan government and the Afghan military was going to be able to hold out for some significant period of time post-withdrawal. And not only that the government, even though, odd to say, we were providing more than half of their revenue for government purposes, we were told that they were going to be able to hang in there. How did the intelligence community get it so wrong?
I can't really speak for the intelligence community. I mean, when we briefed our reports to the intelligence community, we would always ask them, and I can't reveal what they're saying in unclassified, we always ask them is, are we wrong? And they would come back and say, no. So I don't know who was telling which administration that things were going really well, but if you read our reports, and if you read some of the reports from my fellow IGs, particularly the former DOD IG, you could not believe the Afghan government was going to survive, particularly when we withdrew our troops, particularly when we withdrew our air support, and particularly when we withdrew the contractors. I don't really know who would actually have thought the Afghan government was going to survive. And in January, I believe, I issued a report and talked to this committee, the January of that year, that the Air Force itself was saying that the Afghan Air Force, once the contractors left, would collapse within a matter of months. So everybody, this was the worst kept secret in Washington about the capability of the Afghan government to survive. Again, I'm just shocked. It's like the number 300,000 Afghan soldiers and police. I don't know who is telling the administration there were 300,000 Afghan soldiers and police toward the end. Nobody we talked to ever said that that number was near there. We had reports that half of those people were probably ghosts. We were paying their salaries, but they didn't exist. So, I mean, there is a lot of things floating around, and I don't know who is in the intelligence community, not the people we were talking to, because they all agreed with our assessments, our negative assessments. I don't know who is putting this information out and what's the basis for it.
Thank you. My time's up.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Ms. Baylett from Vermont for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today we've been examining mistakes made over this 20-year war that tragically cannot be undone at this point. So I want to focus now on one thing that Congress can and should address immediately, and that's the Afghan Adjustment Act. Vermont is proudly home to hundreds of Afghans who have been resettled in our state. And I was honored recently to meet with a man named Ashukala, who is an Afghan interpreter who worked alongside a Vermonter who served the U.S. Army in Afghanistan. Now, Ashukala and his wife reside in Vermont, and we are so grateful that they're now part of our community. Under the Biden-Harris administration, we've welcomed approximately 100,000 Afghan evacuees to the United States since the summer of 2021. But many of those allies were admitted only on a temporary basis. And right now, they live in fear of an uncertain future. And I talked to many of those folks in my hometown of Brattleboro, Vermont. In July of 2021, the House voted overwhelmingly and on a bipartisan basis to increase the capacity of the Afghan Special Immigration Visa Program. And that bill would have provided an additional 8,000 special immigrant visas and would have eased the burden on obtaining visas. Now, I ask unanimous consent to submit to the record an August 2021 USA Today article about that vote, which occurred as more Afghan territory continued to fall to the Taliban. And it stated, quote, "Some of the Republican House members who this week excoriated President Biden's strategy to pull U.S. troops out of Afghanistan and evacuate Afghan civilians voted last month against legislation to speed up the visa applications process for Afghan citizens. All 16 no votes were from Republicans, and 4 of those members sit on this very committee. Currently, evacuees have only 2 options for resolution: the asylum system or the Afghan Special Immigrant Visa Program. There are now well over 150,000 people currently trapped in Afghanistan awaiting processing through the Special Immigrant Visa Program, while more than 7,000, it's actually 70,000 Afghans, many of whom fought alongside our troops, are currently in the United States living in legal limbo. So, Ms. Shaw, is it fair to say that the Special Immigrant Visa Program is severely overburdened and needs resources?
Thank you so much for that question. That is a serious area of oversight for us. As you noted, there are more than 150,000 SIV applications still pending. And so our work has found, prior to the evacuation and our current work and ongoing work, I think are trending in this direction as well, that while some progress has been made to try to streamline the process and to better resource it, there's still plenty of room for improvement. Processing times still exceed well beyond that 9-month target stated in statute. And so I will note that the department from April 2021 until 2022 did increase their processing rate by about 15 times. So we're seeing progress, but there's still that significant backlog. And so it's a major area of focus for our work.
And following up on that, Ms. Shaw, you said it's a 9-month turnaround in statute. Where are we right now with the timeline? What's the average timeline for one of these folks waiting for relief?
So I don't have averages as of today, but our past work, which looked at averages in the 2020 time period, showed that although we couldn't get a definitive answer on every phase of the process because of how some of the data comes in, we did determine that just 2 of the 4 phases were resulting in average processing times of more than 17 months. And so you can sort of extrapolate from there.
So years?
Potentially, yes.
Okay. Ms. Shaw, so is it fair to say that neither the asylum system or the SIV program can provide timely assistance right now to these individuals who need relief?
So it is true that they can't provide that right now for every person in the backlog, but there are recommendations pending in our work that certainly could help improve the situation. We hope to be able to offer additional recommendations.
So simply put, I just want to say, our partners deserve better. This is not acceptable. And I ask my Republican colleagues to recognize the urgency of this effort and join Democrats in passing a bipartisan Afghan Adjustment Act that will make good to these people who risk their lives alongside of our servicemen and women. Thank you, Ms. Shaw.